Good afternoon and welcome to Deep Roots webinar, Out on the Prairie with Larry. I am Stacia Stelk. I am the Executive Director of Deep Roots, and I am thrilled to be talking with you this afternoon from the Anita B. Gorman Discovery Center in Midtown, Kansas City. I am welcoming to our virtual podium today, Miller Zeiders, who joined Deep Roots as an intern this year and is going to be continuing doing some work with us through this school year as he wraps up his master's program. So please, everyone, welcome Miller and his inaugural webinar. And here we go. Take it away, Miller, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much, Stacia, and hello, everyone. We're so glad you joined us for our August Lunch and Learn webinar. Amidst the heat of summer, we find ourselves roaming a native prairie planting we covered last month in our newsletter, The Pollinator, which if you haven't already subscribed to, make sure you are. I'm Miller Zeiders, the intern for Deep Roots, and I'm quite excited to share this time with you. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I am no Tammy Thompson. I know, the legendary host you are accustomed to seeing is not here. However, I have been handed the virtual baton to guide us through today's webinar and hopefully have some fun and learn a little something along the way. And before I talk about today's topic and introduce our speakers, I want to make a few announcements. First of all, we are incredibly grateful to the Alvin L. Gottlieb Foundation and the Missouri Department of Conservation for their generous sponsorship of this webinar series. And we are so grateful to you, our wonderful viewers, for your support of our programs and webinars. It would simply not be possible without you. So thank you. Give yourselves a pat on the back. This webinar will be recorded and up on the Deep Roots website by Monday. You will also receive an email with that link and any resources mentioned during the recording. So watch your email and our website. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll be notified each time we upload a video. On this beautiful August day, we find ourselves roaming a reconstructed prairie, inspecting some gorgeous plants, hopping from flower to flower, and engaging in some great discourse pertaining to how this prairie came to be, how it is managed, and what it will look like throughout the upcoming seasons. We wanted to see and show you the brilliance of reconstructed native prairie and how different management techniques yield different looks. During the program, if you have questions, please note them in the Q&A tab down below on your Zoom, and we will get to many of those as we can. We'll be using the chat to send you links and references mentioned during the webinar. Make sure your volume is up so you hear all the great bits of information contained within this video and this broadcast. With that, I'm honored to introduce our speakers today. Tim Rodgers is the founder and CEO of Nova R Wealth, a registered investment advisor. He is our awesome homeowner and has become a friend of ours at Deep Roots. Shooting footage at his home and getting an opportunity to grill him with questions was a great experience, to say the least. And Larry Rizzo is a retired biologist with the Missouri Department of Conservation, co-founder of Kansas City Wildlands, and biologist with Habitat Architecture. His expertise and knowledge within the realm of native prairie installation, maintenance, and various other abiotic and biotic factors pertaining to helps drive the way we think about the Midwest prairie. Engaging with these two in candid conversation and drilling down to the nitty-gritty of what it takes to stimulate a successful native prairie planting was truly a unique experience. So without further ado, Tim, Larry, take it away.
I want to welcome our Deep Roots guest this afternoon to tour Tim's Prairie. We're calling this Out on the Prairie with Larry, and we have Tim Rodgers, our host, who has planted 10 acres, is that right?
8 acres, yeah.
8 acres of reconstructed prairie. And Larry Rizzo is a retired biologist from the Missouri Department of Conservation that I sometimes refer to of the GOAT of conservation world. So welcome, Larry and Tim. We're going to tag along as we walk through the prairie, talk about what's blooming, and see what's alive and flying or flittering around, I guess, in the prairie today. So Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you started on this journey?
Well, I had the good fortune growing up. I lived half my childhood in the city, and then my parents moved to the country, actually about 10 miles east of here outside of Prairie, Missouri. And so we lived on a 40-acre patch of ground. And so I had a sense for what nature was like. The way I think about that is when you live in nature, you can't help but be impacted by it. You don't even really have to think about it, but it's very impactful. And so I knew if I ever lived on acreage later that I'd want to do something with the ground. And then a friend of mine who installs a wildlife habitat over Missouri showed me a picture of a prairie that he had seeded, which is full of penstemon. I didn't even know what the plant was at the time, but it was a really cool photo, and I remember that. So when we ended up acquiring this property, which I didn't know ahead of time that was going to happen, I decided that I wanted to try to put in my own prairie stand in. So yeah.
Excellent. And so one of the reasons we stopped here is you've got a lot of really fun things blooming. Tim and Larry, do you guys want to talk about them a little bit?
Well, I initially planted 12, we drilled them in 12 forbs and 4 grasses. So bee balm certainly being one of them, and grayhead coneflower. This particular patch here is a little heavier than it is the rest of the field, but it's really coming in this year, so super excited about that. I love it when the bumblebees visit bee balm, which I think gets very attracted to them, so very, very attractive flower.
They love that flower. We should mention, first of all, that the term forb, we should always mention, is just a shorthand, just flowers, broadleaf plants. When we say forb, we're talking about the flowers.
Nice.
Yeah, Monarda, both of these two plants right here, the grayhead coneflower and the Monarda or bee balm, which is in the mint family. Those are excellent, both very excellent bee plants. Monarda actually is a nectar flower as well, so hummingbirds can feed on it as well. Each one of these little individual flowers is a little tube.
Oh, those are each individual flowers?
Yeah, that will have nectar inside of it. So, in fact, there are cultivars that come in red that the hummingbirds really go crazy over. So we saw partridge pea right here, a legume.
Yeah.
Bean or pea family.
And
They'll
legumes
make
are
a little
important
pod.
because,
They put nitrogen into the soil. Yeah,
nice.
so it's always good to have a mix of those.
I believe that's not certainly bloomed yet, it's later summer, but is that Sawtooth Sunflower,
Yeah,
Larry?
we've got it
Yeah.
right here. Sawtooth or I would tend to call that Maximilian Sunflower.
Okay.
Is that in your mix? I don't remember if I saw that in the mix or not, but it doesn't have, the edges don't look toothy enough for the Sawtooth. I think you've got both in here. Those are both excellent bee plants. This is a big Choreopsis here.
Oh, really?
I love this plant because it creates a bouquet late summer on the
neat.
very, very top.
Yeah.
It is stunning. It's just like a bouquet, you know,
Lovely.
5 feet in the air, floating back and forth.
Choreopsis tripteris, I think is that one. And this is a good day, 90 some degrees, where we might really notice this effect. This is compass plant. We've got some in bloom over here. We'll show you in a second, but on very hot days, a botanist showed me this a long time ago, you can feel this leaves. I feel a little bit, but not as dramatic as some days, and it's noticeably cool to the touch, the transpiration from the leaf.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
the name, of course, comes from the fact that it orients itself toward the sun, so it tends to, the skinnier part of the leaf tends to orient north-south, where it catches sun to the east and west.
Nice.
The first time
Here's one blooming.
First time I noticed a compass plant flowering was actually further out in the field, and I noticed this really tall yellow flower that, and I didn't understand that compass plants actually got that tall, and it flowered, and then the next year a lot more came in. I read a little more about it and figured out they can get 8-9 feet tall and live 100 years. Just
Really?
amazing.
I
Yeah.
can attest in landscaping they can get taller than that, because mine have. Mine have gotten 12 feet high, which I don't think I see in nature. Sometimes these native plants in a landscape setting, for whatever reason, soil or whatever conditions, can go kind of crazy and behave in ways that they don't out in the wild. One of the interesting things, though, about compass plant, it's in the genus Silphium. There's only 4 species of that around here in Missouri, where I'm familiar with. And it's in the composite or the Asteraceae family. But the thing that makes it unique, we call those composites. This is a good example with the grayhead coneflower, same family. Composite because it's a composite of 2 different types of flowers. You have the disc flowers in the center, and these little brown things sticking up, those are actually little individual flowers. If you think of a sunflower,
Yeah.
Each one of those is a little tiny flower. That's why it's full of sunflower seeds. One of those giant
Oh my gosh.
sunflowers. You can picture that very
You just
easily.
blew my mind.
So these are little flowers. Those are the disc flowers, and the kind of pretty ones we think of more as a flower are called the ray flowers. These are fertile. The ones that make the seeds, the ray flowers are not, except on the silphiums. And that's what makes this genus unique in the composites. And this one, the disc flowers in the center are sterile, and it is the ray flowers that are fertile, and that's where the seeds form. Makes these little scaly seeds that will slough off later on. I learned in a landscape planting, it goes nuts and they reseed themselves like crazy, and they have such a deep tap root that you can't pull them up. If you have ones in places you don't want, by the time you recognize what it is, it won't come out of the ground. So a friend of mine once, a colleague I had with the Department of Conservation, once tried, I don't know, just for kicks or whatever, he was a botanist, so botanists are all, some of them are a little off, but he decided just for grins to try to dig one of these up one time. And he said he dug down about 2 feet and the tap root hadn't started to taper yet. Wow. If that gives you an idea. So they go down a long way. And that's why they can also persist in places where, there were formerly prairie but have been kind of beat up and abused or overgrazed for years and years. You can still have a compass plant hanging on because of that tap root.
So was that in your initial plant list, or is that possibly something that was here ages ago?
Actually, you're talking about the
compass plant.
compass plant.
Yeah.
I don't believe it was in my original plant list.
And I was very curious about that when I saw that list, because I saw other things out here in my previous visit that I didn't see on that list. Yeah. And here in Johnson County, I mean, it's a county that was once...
Technically Miami, but that's okay.
Miami, sorry. Forgot
okay.
how far south.
Pretty close.
Same deal. Yeah. The landscape was virtually all prairie, except in the river bottoms and a few other little places like that. And you can have surviving intact prairie that's never been plowed, but you can't necessarily identify that by looking at it. But you start managing in the right way and like burning it, and things can still be down there in the soil waiting for their chance and can pop up, so you never know. Once you plow the prairie, of course, it's gone. But
this is the only patch so far of one of my nemesises, which is Johnson grass. I have been pulling this out, but I recognize that I may have to spot spray that.
It's a tough one to get rid of.
That's as big as that's gotten so far. My real arch nemesis is, of course, Ceresia, which I've learned I'll just do battle over here. I won't win the war, but I will keep it at bay, hopefully.
Hey, what's this kind of bluish gray thing?
It's rattlesnake master.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just planted one.
We've got a ton of it out here.
Nice.
Yeah, for this year it's just been so vibrant, and much more than any other year.
Full flower. We have a tiny little bee there on it.
Oh, cute.
Working it over. We tend to think of bees as, I guess, honeybee, bumblebee, things like that, but we forget that there are just dozens and dozens of species of them, and some of them are just a couple of millimeters. I mean, they're just tiny little specialist pollinators.
It tends to get whiter too as the summer progresses. Yeah.
Okay.
And
because I thought it was a white bloom. Okay.
I've never read this, but I've always presumed the name comes from some old folk wisdom that it must have had some curative properties for a rattlesnake bite or something like that. I don't know.
This is one of my favorites here, if I got it right, Larry, but this is ironweed, I think.
Yeah.
And this blooms later on, but it's deep purple bloom. It's just absolutely beautiful.
And this will grow and bloom in old fields and other places besides prairies. It's very common. But it's a pretty plant, and butterflies love it.
So you planted in 2014?
I planted in 2014, and I spent a couple years being extremely frustrated that somehow I'd done something wrong. Mostly what I got the first year was ragweed. And then I learned that, ragweed can set things up for that next, plant. And so ragweed has dissipated. There's a little bit of it in there, but not much.
You expect it's an annual, and you expect those annual weeds early on, but that's a very good lesson not to panic in the early stages. Most plantings are going to go through a weedy looking period when they're first getting established. So over here, Tim, looks like your portion here that you did not burn last go round, last
Right. I'm
spring.
doing a third this year, so I left this so that invertebrates and animals can overwinter, and so yeah, it's interesting because it's just a whole different look in terms of what I burnt or mowed and what I left. It doesn't even look like the same field, but had I burned this side, it would look like that side. And so I'm going to burn this. I'm going to do a little differently this year. I'm going to burn it in the fall, which I understand can help invigorate the forbs or flowers, whereas if you burn it late spring, more so the grasses, I think. So yeah. And then I've got some small woody plants. You'll find them in here, which fire helps set those back. That's milkweed, yeah. Yeah.
And we may not think aesthetically this looks as attractive as the burn part. Burn parts typically look a little greener and lusher and things like that. But this duff layer down here that's left and not burning, it's accumulated here, is actually can be pretty important to a lot of creatures. Things like small mammals, rodents, you know, they can find concealment under there that they can't find under here, particularly in the winter months when they're vulnerable to, you know, hawks and things like that. If this was a larger scale, this is really important to some grassland nesting birds. They have to have that duff to hide a nest in. There are some birds that like bare ground to nest in. There are some that absolutely have to have this kind of structure.
So can you give me an example of one of each?
Now, you have to have kind of a particular
Yeah,
size to attract
sense.
certain birds. But
Yeah.
if
Prairie
we
chickens
were
aren't
on a
gonna be
larger
here.
scale prairie, there's two sparrows that are, one of them is kind of a species of conservation concern called a Henslow sparrow, and it needs a year, if not 2 years, of accumulated duff or litter to nest in. There's another little one called a grasshopper sparrow that likes fairly short vegetation and definitely bare ground to run around. It runs around like a little rodent on the ground. So that's why mixing up this structure is always good. But even on this scale, it's very important for insects, because there are insects, believe it or not, that will overwinter inside the stems of plants. So you burn that up, you're obviously burning them up. But you leave some of this, and whatever those insects are, they have a chance to recolonize the other side. Vice versa. So.
One of my favorite things to do in late summer is to go up to the top of the field, and as the sun is coming down to the tree line up there, hold my hand up and block the sunlight, and you literally can see the heat rising off the field, and you'll see birds swooping in and out and insects going over the top of the field and dragonflies, etc. It's just spectacular. And you recognize how important nature is, because I mow the other side of the drive and none of that activity exists over there, none of it. And if there is activity, it's usually making its way over here.
Right. This is the remains of the penstemon. I think we mentioned earlier the penstemon
Yeah.
digitalis, or foxglove beard tongue, the little white snapdragon-like flower. It's also a really good bee plant. Got some dragonflies buzzing
Yeah, they're
around
happy,
here.
aren't they?
They're predators, so that means they're out here because they're finding other insects to eat.
They're not pollinators, right, Larry?
No,
Yeah.
they don't pollinate. They eat some of the pollinators. It's all part of the food chain. Well, this is our nemesis here. We mentioned earlier. This is Ceresia lustadiza, which is the greatest exotic invasive plant, the biggest threat to our grasslands and prairies that we have throughout the Midwest. It's a noxious weed in Kansas. It's part of its problem. I mean, if left to its own devices, it can just form monocultures that are chest high. Very old infestations of this stuff is horrific. It makes one big mature plant, they say, can produce up to something like 3,000 seeds, and those seeds can lie dormant in the soil and germinate up to 30 years later. So you can quite easily get the idea why it's
Well, I've
hard
got
to eradicate.
a little heavier crop of it this year. I don't know if it's because I burnt, but I changed tactics a little bit. I've gotten out here, I've actually tied the plants together, and then I put a tube over it, a concrete form tube with a handle, so I can spot spray it and then not hopefully impact the plants next to it. So next month I'll be trying to eradicate that as best I can. As I said earlier, I'll never win the war, but I hopefully keep it at bay. I think so far I've done an okay job with that. So.
Right. Here's common ragweed we've mentioned. Kind of little disturbed area here at the edge. It's still kind of hanging on, likes it here, but it's actually a valuable critter plant to see. A lot of things eat ragweed seeds. That's a gall. That's most likely
cool.
a goldenrod. One of the goldenrods. They often form these galls on them. In fact, they'll have a little. A little wasp, I think, is what comes out of those things.
Neat.
People who live in northern states will go around and collect these late in the fall and use the little larvae inside for ice fishing bait.
Really? Okay.
Now, does goldenrod tend to be invasive, Larry? I mean, I notice it's got its areas around here, but
There's a lot of species of it. Some of them are weedier, more aggressive in their behavior than others. There's tall blazing star, which should be.
That's going to turn deep purple in just.
A lot of years it's blooming by now, and I noticed this somewhere where I was just yesterday that it was just getting going.
That is a beautiful plant.
Is it? Yeah. So people, even if you don't know the name of that, you might be familiar with the way it looks. Big purple spike, because this is very commonly used like in cut flower arrangements. You see it all. I refer to that and like pale purple cone flower. Those are two of the, I call them prairie poster children. Every prairie should have some of those. I remember taking people on tours of prairie where we talked about plants like that, wild petunia, and they seemed kind of surprised. Oh, Petunia. It's like, well, they don't just create those out of thin air. They got to start somewhere in the wild. So that's the original right there.
Had a more purple clover. I saw some here just a second ago. Than ever before this year. This is actually quite a few places.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful plant.
This is an excellent bee plant right here too, and often on prairies it will grow. You'll have white prairie clover too, which has the same form to its flower. It's white. Its leaves are bigger, the white I'm talking about. But for whatever reason, and this is always kind of interested me the more I'm learning about bees and pollinators, the purple is much preferred to bees than the white prairie clover. And I don't remember the reason for that, or if we even know a reason for that, but that'd be a good one there to harvest a little later and spread the wealth around where we find little patches of bare ground.
I'm looking at the compass plants popping out. I thought that was a real surprise.
You know what's fun too is when a bird will fly up and perch itself on the very top of the compass plant. You see it all the time. It's really fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's no small thing, you know. If you're a bird out here, they need those perches for their singing perches. You know, a bird sits and announces its territory. You need some kind of standing residual woody or something tall like that. They'll definitely take advantage of it.
Just strikes me that, you know, at a point in time that there were just millions and millions of acres, something like this, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that would just be so wonderful to see.
Well, that's what you've done. You know, we can't recreate a real prairie. Once it's plowed or gone, it's gone. But we can put back some of the pieces, and that's what you've done here.
Because like less than 4%, right, of prairie remains.
In Missouri, it's much less than that.
Okay.
Like 1/2 of 1%.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of the entire Great Plains, and a lot of that is in the Flint Hills.
And a lot of the land in the Flint Hills, since its priority is for livestock, is not managed for biodiversity or plant diversity. It's managed for forage with emphasis on the grasses. So it's It's intact prairie, and that's certainly a good thing, but it's not managed for diversity like this. This is your Sawtooth Sunflower right here that we mentioned earlier. And here's one we haven't talked about. This is wild quinine. Is that a new planting?
I don't think it is.
Probably one that's not usually included in plantings.
Yeah.
I think you've still got prairie underneath us here that was here.
That'd be a great
And
problem.
I think what you've done is encourage that as well. So
You say that's wild quinine?
yeah, Parthenium.
Pretty.
Yeah.
Amazing too how the grasses, you know, just in the later part of summer just really start to pop. I mean, it seems like some of these have grown like a foot in a week or something. I don't know.
I like when the big bluestone starts to flower, you know, it has that little three-part seed head. I always kind of envision it looking, there's a period of time when to me it just looks like a little hand just kind of reaching up for the sky.
I love the color that it gets as it goes into fall.
Yeah, a lot of
pretty.
people don't appreciate the fact that you know, grasses turn color in the fall too. So what you can notice here, looking around, you know, as I told you when I first visited, I think it's definitely the way to go to not try to put too many species in here, because frankly a lot of them won't do that well. So focus on a limited suite of easier to grow species, and a lot of those, like the grayhead coneflower thing, boy, they really are the workhorses for our pollinators anyway. The penstemon, things like that, have a few milkweeds in the mix and things like that. But what you do notice that's really nice here is your ratio of grasses to forbs. Look around, it's really good. It's not overly grass dominated, or the other way around. So,
As I said earlier, it's fascinating to me that, you know, it all got planted 8 years ago, and this is what is the result of it without being reseeded. So
you got past that first weedy period, you know, about how many years in was it before you really
it's a third year.
got excited about it? It's
Yeah.
really started shaping up after
Yeah.
3 years. That's pretty good. It's almost.
And
on
I don't think
the
the quality
shorter
of
end of things. It can take a while.
I don't think
you gotta be patient.
the quality of the soil is necessarily the best here, but that's one thing exciting to me too, is how the prairie is enriching the soil.
Yeah,
with this-
absolutely. Absolutely, building up organic matter in the soil.
Drawing down carbon in the process.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, water infiltration, things like that. That's why our little prairie streams, you know, once flowed very clear. All that water infiltrate through all that soil and root mass, and that's some serious seed there. I'll definitely collect that, otherwise it's going to.
I will do that.
Path.
I will do that.
That's going to be a lot of seed. It's very easy. Just once don't push it if it doesn't come off really readily. Once it's dry and ready to go, it just crumble in your hand. You just strip it right off.
Yeah, beautiful plant.
Yeah, you got enough bare ground out there to take off any other seed.
So would you wait until after it burned to spread that, or would you just capture it and take it out and
You
spread it?
can, but well, it just depends on where you want it, I guess. If you felt like that plant didn't exist at all on your other piece up there, and you're burning that this winter, yeah, you could hold off and hold it back until the ground's blackened and throw it down. Head of a snow is always good for seeding. There's a common milkweed here.
Yeah.
Common milkweed is the one that has the kind of fuzzy looking pods there. It's already bloomed, of course, but have a pinkish flower. And we all know their importance to a particular butterfly that a lot of people are heavily invested in. It's a neat thing to. I've told people I think monarch butterflies are kind of the ultimate great little conservation focal point or theme for people, because, you know, one of the things, if people learn of a conservation mission, well, what can I do? You know, well, Monarch Butterfly, you can buy yourself a few milkweeds and go home and plant them, and you'll get caterpillars on the dang thing, even in the city. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot, so it's really I think a good conservation poster child again, if we say.
So Tim, when they're migrating, do you see a lot of monarchs come through your property?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And down here, there's a heavy amount of milkweed.
Keep an eye on those later in the year. You'll probably see monarch caterpillars on them.
Awesome.
Welcome back. That was an amazing video, and it was a wonderful opportunity to get to see Tim Rodgers' land and really get to see Tim and Larry in the wild, showing us a lot about Prairie that we had never even heard before. So thank you, Tim Rodgers and Larry Rizzo. Welcome into the panel. We're about to start some Q&A from our viewers, but before we get into that, I would like to ask about part of the video. We get into discussing intact prairie and some indicators for what might be remnant intact prairie, specifically on your property, Tim. And I would really like to hear some discussion between you two about more in depth about, you know, what are some indicators about remnant intact prairie? What does that mean for the land, for the soil quality and nutrients? And from your perspective, Tim, how does that feel to know that you're bringing back the beauty of the land, that there are some things there that you may not have meant to be there, but you're reinvigorating the land? So if you guys could talk a little bit about that, I think that would be incredibly interesting.
No, thank you, Miller. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my original intent was just to plant the fields so I'd have some native flowers and grasses, perhaps, not really knowing where this journey might take me. But as time has gone on, I've really become a bit impassioned about trying to learn more and more about prairies, their importance in nature. And as I mentioned in the video, it's just striking to me that literally millions of acres throughout the Midwest were covered with prairie, and now only a fraction of that. So and again, it wasn't my original intent, but any contribution I can make to that is great. I didn't really think about any remnant prairie possibilities. This is a acreage that I never knew whether it was actually ever tilled or not. I think on the other side of the drive, it had been hayed before we purchased it. I'm not sure about where I ended up putting the prairie, but
Larry pointed out to me in the initial visit that we had that, there's rock through a part of that side where the prairie's planted, and which probably reinforced the idea that maybe it hadn't been tilled before. Maybe there's a possibility that there's some native plants under there I haven't even seen yet that might come up. That's really, really exciting if that turns out to be the case. He saw some things that weren't on my initial plant list, and I didn't even connect the two. So again, I'm on a journey. I like it because I'm kind of doing this at my own pace. I don't put too much pressure on myself to try to learn everything, because I won't. I think prairies are incredibly complex from the research I have done. It looks like there's a lot that's still unknown about prairies, especially I think what happens underground. So it's just all very exciting, and hopefully that addresses your question.
Oh, it does. And it was an incredible experience getting out and seeing not only your property, but just the diversity in your property, seeing, that this was a previous untilled plot of land that has this prairie sitting in it, and, factoring in there's a natural spring there as well is just gorgeous. And for Larry, how does it feel as a biologist going out to a plot of land that is, a lot of work has gone into it to make it a reconstructed prairie, but also seeing those aspects of the remnant, what was there before, coming back up? What do you think about that? How does that feel?
Well, normally we have two situations. You have an actual remnant prairie that's a piece of the original thing that's still there that you can restore and bring back to health. Many times they've been degraded by invasive exotic plants, or haven't been burned, or being taken over by woody vegetation. Those are probably the three biggest things. So you either have an actual remnant prairie, or you have a planting where everything you see there has come from seed that you put back, that you put on the ground. But then we have these interesting places like Tim's, where it's a bit of a hybrid, where we know what 12 species he put in there 8 years ago. But there's other things that weren't on that list that we saw out there that basically could only have come from, original remnant prairie that's managed to hang on. Some of that's easy to understand, things like the compass plant that has that humongous taproot that goes down so deep, it's still hanging on in the soil, and you give it some love, and meaning some fire, and reduce the competition that was there before we started the planting, and it will come back on its own. Others are even more interesting, like the purple prairie clover, I don't believe is on that list. And to see that plant in there is pretty significant.
It was a great experience seeing the candidness of both of you going out and seeing things in a different phase that have popped up, that whether they weren't on that list or not, but seeing them in such great health, you can see the excitement on both of your faces and how cool it was. So now we can move into the Q&A questions from our viewers. Julie Weiss asks, each year my gray-headed coneflower's vegetation turns a silvery tan color in July, not green at all anymore, yet the flowers look healthy and wonderful. Is this normal or indicative of a problem? I think that would probably be a little more turned to you, Larry.
I don't have a good answer for that. Can't think of noticing that myself. I'm wondering if it's just getting thirsty, and it's not uncommon though for prairie plants undergoing some stress to flower. In fact, it can encourage robust flowering. To basically reproduce before you die kind of thing. So plants under a certain amount of stress flower really well. So that's not uncommon. So I'm just wondering if that might be a factor of late summer and droughty conditions. It's getting a little heat and drought stressed.
Tim, have you happened to notice anything similar to this maybe, or plants that might be struggling with this heat that's been pretty strong these past couple months?
I'm not sure, Miller, I'm sharp enough to recognize that. So I think the answer is no. It seems like I've seen a lot. And it's interesting to me how, when I burnt later in the spring this year, how things came in later. And then what was interesting to me too is purple coneflower, which I used to have a great deal of, not so much this year, and the petals didn't develop as they normally would. So I found that interesting. So I don't have an answer though. Yeah.
Interesting. Luke Thompson asks, if you find that your grasses didn't come up well after year 3, what steps can be taken to right that?
Well, you can always reseed. My first question will be what grasses, which grasses are we talking about? And the other thing is if this is part of a prairie planting, such as Tim's property, oftentimes the grasses are more aggressive than we want them to be. So perhaps you don't have a problem. It may wind up being a good thing in the long run. And year 3, you should be seeing some grasses coming in, but that's not to say that they still may not in future years. So I wouldn't give up on it either.
Okay. Well, I hope that helps. Deborah Sweeten asks, how can we get the grass to burn in fall when it's green? I keep telling the spouse that fall burns is recommended, but he insists that native grass in forbs field won't burn when it's fall green growing. They're trying to get rid of Ceresia aspidisa.
If your burn objective is to get rid of Ceresia, and there is some evidence that late summer, early fall burns have some benefit there. I don't have personal experiences with that. It is a tough time of year to burn, not just because it's tough to make the fire go, but it's tough on you if you're the one burning, if it's 90 degrees out there. So that's a separate issue. But as far as fall burning goes, it tends to benefit your forbs or your flowers. But there's a huge difference in burning right after Labor Day or burning right after Thanksgiving. And some people might still consider both of those fall, but they're very different things. So fall burning after we've had some killing frosts is an excellent time to burn. It's probably the time of year Native Americans lit their fires most frequently. So you will have no trouble making things burn depending on our growing season and when we get killing frost. But the end of October through mid-December is an excellent time to burn, and usually the fuels will certainly handle it then. But burning earlier than that during really while growing season is still going on to knock back your Ceresia is a totally different tactic. I would probably only do that if you really have severe problem with it. I mean, if it's forming monocultures and you don't have a lot of diversity in an area like that, I might consider that. If you're in a really high quality area with a lot of other plant diversity, you're going to hurt some things burning during the growing season. So typically we handle Ceresia through herbicide.
Okay. And moving on to the next question, I think Tim and Larry, you both can speak plentifully on this next question. What kind of planning goes into a project like this? What would the time scale look like for this? Does it require a lot of outsourcing and bringing people in that are really knowledgeable in the area? I know Tim, you spoke on, you did a lot of research going into putting this plan together. Would you guys speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was pretty straightforward and fairly simple. It was mentioned in the video that I have a friend acquaintance that I knew had done some wildlife habitat work in Missouri, and he showed me this picture that had all the penstemon in it. So he was the person I reached out to when we did acquire some land about trying to plant a field with some native plants, not even really kind of knowing exactly what that meant. But as far as the preparation, that field did have quite a bit of fescue on top of it. So he did with a tractor, sprayed the field with Roundup and killed the fescue. And then I want to say within 3 months, he helped me drill in that seed mix. And then I was off and running. So I since that time, I've read that, there's even better ways to prepare, allowing, if you use herbicide, killing, let's say, fescue, and then allowing things to regrow and then doing it again. And I didn't do that. That might be why I had the ragweed issue earlier on. I'm not quite sure. So if I had to start over, I might have done it a little bit differently because I know a little bit more now. But at the end of the day, it worked out pretty well. And what I learned is patience and kind of looking forward to what might develop next. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, yeah, it does. And that was one thing that I remember during our interview. I remember sensing a lot of wisdom in related to patience when talking about this. You were very excited, very hopeful, but you also were very understanding of the process. Larry, what is for you? What would be the most important thing for individuals and landowners getting into this type of process, wanting to reconstruct their own prairie? What would be some tips of advice you would give to them?
Well, I would just reiterate that it's extremely important to do thorough prep work before you would attempt a prairie planting like Tim's. And the more time basically you put into that prep work, the better. I'm a big proponent of, for instance, killing the existing vegetation throughout an entire growing season. That is, start your spraying, let's say late winter, early spring, even sometime in spring at least, and maybe a couple of more times throughout the growing season, because you have different weedy species of plants that are going to come up at different times of year, and it's nice to hit all of those. A lot of plantings we see, if someone just does a one-shot dose of Roundup and then puts the seed down, you're fighting competition for a long, long time, and you'll regret it. So the amount of time you spend on prep work is really important. I live in an urban area. I have a 10 by 30 foot prairie on the side of my yard, and I spent a whole year killing it out, and it's worked pretty well. I would say that's true even on that small of a scale. It's really important, and you won't regret it the more time you spend on your prep. Maybe one exception to that is if you're planting into a crop field. That's an excellent way, because of it that field has been cropped for a few years. Weeds aren't as big of an issue, and you can plant into that more quickly if you have that situation.
Interesting. Thank you both of you for your input. We have another question from Sheila Upbergman, who asks, we purchased 7 acres in city limits. Are there other ways to manage a prairie than burning?
Well, you would be substituting mowing, which is not as good. I mean, prairies, these species are adapted to fire, and they flourish when you burn. It's good for them. It increases the amount of flowering activity generally you have the year following a burn. So aesthetically, it makes things a little nicer. You get rid of that duff accumulation periodically. But if you can't do that, you're going to have to substitute mowing, and that will help keep the woody vegetation from moving into it, which is part of the function that the fire has.
One thing I would note, Miller, in my experience, the portion of the field I did not burn, I left this year. I did mow the edge of it because I didn't like the natives growing up through the dead material from last year. I didn't like the look of that, so I mowed the edge. And what was interesting is I noticed how vibrant even the edge of the field was compared to the portion that I hadn't mowed or burned. So that was very telling how mowing is a good option in many cases. So yeah.
There are, I'm sure, a number of native remnant prairies on the Missouri side. Really, most all of them that are still in private hands are hay prairies, so they get hayed, cut once a year, and I'm guessing there's probably a lot of those landowners that don't burn at all, or very infrequently if they do at all, and those prairies still look very healthy. The advantage there, we're talking about haying versus mowing, of course, is that haying, the vegetation is taken away. Where if mowing, you leave the dead mowed vegetation there, it's going to tend to suppress growth. So if you can remove the residual vegetation when you mow, that'll be so much the better.
Interesting. Okay. And there's another management question we have here, which is any tips on tree growth control? Seeing lots of young trees when I look over our planting. This is from Sarah Nadvernick.
Sarah, if I had a magic formula for you, our prairie managers would be very happy, because I'll just tell you, there's no end of fighting woody vegetation in our prairies around here. And that's because we live in an area where the annual rainfall supports woodies, equally with grasses. They've got this, battle going on forever. When we have cooler, wetter summers like we've tended to have in recent years, maybe this year not so much finally, but we've had a number of cool, wet summers that tends to favor those woodies. And particularly, it depends which ones you've got. If you've got the native dogwoods like gray dogwood or rough leaf dogwood moving in, that's challenging. You're probably always going to have some component of it, but you should be able to get them under control with some combination of mowing and burning. And I don't know what size and area you have. If it's a small enough area, you can cut them individually and treat individual stumps with herbicide to keep it from resprouting. It just depends on the scale you're talking about, whether that's practical or not.
Tim, have you had any experience with seeing other saplings or trees popping up in your prairie in recent years?
Yes, I would say it's more frequent. I've chosen in situations, burning does set woody plants back for sure, and also I spot spray. So that has not been my biggest challenge, but that's how I've dealt with it so far.
Okay, thank you. Val Frankowski asks, you indicated the advantage of starting with a limited suite of forbs. Would that change county to county, or is it easily listable?
I would say most of we don't have that much variation right around. If we're talking the greater Kansas City metro area, you can basically use the same list of plants. And again, my advice on that is based on the fact often if you try to put in too many species, first of all, the cost of your planting is going to just skyrocket. A lot of those species, which might seem really attractive and that you'd want in your planting, the seed's very expensive, and you're not going to have large quantities of it anyway in there. And frankly, a lot of that just may never show up. So I think you're much better off in selecting 10 to 20 species of forbs that are, let's say, more aggressive and easy to grow, that you're going to have success with, and that will benefit things like pollinators big time. Things like the penstemon that was in the video, the grayhead coneflower, those are two excellent examples. Monarda would be another one. Some of those types of plants that you're much more likely to have success with and not break the bank on your seed mix.
Mm-hmm. And a question from Deborah Sweden is, our native grasses and forbs prairie, lots of blazing star, is adjacent to the woods. They have brush hogged areas where trees are taking over, applied stump killer, but these woody plants continue to grow. She asks how and when to eradicate the woody tree, and is there a time period that is best suited for? I know we just kind of spoke on this, but is there a good time of year to attack the woody plants starting to rise up?
I would tend to do it fall and winter. You want to hit these things. First of all, it's easier on you than trying to do it during the hot times of year, but you want to catch the trees when they're putting their nutrients down into the ground, when they're going dormant. You wouldn't do that work when it was super cold out, but anytime during the fall, November, December is an excellent time. October, November, December to cut and treat stumps like that. You'll have the best effectiveness that way.
Okay, I hope that helps, Deborah. I hope you get rid of those trees.
And I don't know what Deborah's putting on them. Tordon is a frequent chemical we use that's highly effective, or you can use very strong glyphosate, which is the ingredient in Roundup. at a stronger concentration for stump treating. Oftentimes that might be something upwards of 20% or so that you put on stumps versus your typical foliar spraying that you put on the leaves. It'll need to be stronger to apply to stumps.
Mm-hmm. And Deborah did just say that she thinks that they use Toradon, so good.
That
From
should
Sharon,
work.
I'm sorry.
I said that should work.
Hopefully. Sharon Ashworth asks, do you have any erosion control suggestions, timing of planting, erosion mat, species selection, when killing existing vegetation on a slope?
That's a whole new ballgame. I mean, when you're talking about slopes, particularly, of course, the steeper they get, you may want to use some sort of mat or something like that to place over your seed, or to put down some type of faster growing but short-lived cover. Sometimes something like Virginia rye is often used in that situation to get some root system down to help hold that soil as quickly as possible. I will give a plug to the Missouri Prairie Foundation, and the most recent newsletter had an article about that very thing you might want to check out, about planting, doing small, these were relatively small, more landscape scale plantings, but on slopes. You might want to check that out.
Interesting. And are there alternatives to Roundup for preparation, perhaps a burn mow cycle before going into the planting? Is that something that's common? Does that exist?
Can you repeat that after alternatives to Roundup?
Yeah, a burn or mow cycle maybe. I know, Tim, you talked about going in with Roundup and killing the fescue. Is burning or mowing an option before for a solid base for preparation going into a planting?
It can be. You want to kill out the existing vegetation as your objective. So that whatever prep you can do to make that plant more susceptible to taking in the herbicide will help you. So you could take a fescue field. It'd be a good tactic if you had a fescue field to burn it, let it regrow. It's nice and fresh and vibrant. You get rid of the duff. So you've got a more targeted application of the herbicide if you were to do that. That's not a bad thing to do at all.
Okay. And our last question here, what is your view on cultivars of native plants? Do you think this is a potential way to increase the quantity and or variety of native plants? I think that would be a great question for both of you. One for Tim, going through that planting list. I'm sure you discovered a plethora of plants to put in there, whether they were native or not. And for Larry, the biology side, it's an interesting question.
Well, I took the easy way out. I listened to the professionals and they helped me build the planning list because my knowledge at that point wasn't great. So I went with what I believed was some probably good advice, and I think it turned out pretty well. So, yeah.
I'd agree. It's beautiful.
It's a thorny subject. In a planting on a larger scale, I would always want to use the true native variety myself. There are situations I don't have huge issues with cultivars in landscape plantings, let's say, or in a bed, something around your home. Sometimes all we're talking about are things that make that plant maybe shorter and have a stiffer stem so that it doesn't fall over, or has a longer blooming period perhaps. So I mean, I don't have big issues with that in that kind of setting. But putting them out there in the landscape on a larger scale and a true prairie planting, I would not use cultivars in a situation like that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for letting us get some great footage, getting to talk with you guys behind the scenes of the video and all this. Two great knowledgeable individuals that I know I was lucky to get a chance to not only speak with, but to be around and be influenced by your expertise and knowledge and wisdom. Thanks to the both of you so much for being here today and taking the time to answer some questions and speak with us.
Enjoyed it.
And before we go, we would like to give away a prize, an 8-pack of native plant note cards by local artist Nancy Wah. They are lovely and treasured by those who receive them. So here is the quiz question. What plant is cool to the touch? We will draw a random name from the chat. So if you need some time to figure out your answer, there is no rush. While your answers are piling in, I would like to remind you about Planet Native. We would like to draw your attention to our wonderful upcoming event. The registration for Planet Native is upon us. It is here. You can go to the link that we have in our resources, apply there, or go through the Deep Roots webpage and find the website through there. And it is going to be a great conference. We have just an amazing list of speakers and of keynote speakers and people coming who are going to be presenting at the conference. It is going to be a wonderful time and a very, very educating experience for everyone who finds themselves there. So make sure to go and register for Planet Native. Native Plants at Noon occurs every third Thursday of the month. We will be on the road with Cape Girardeau Nature Center staff exploring the Sand Prairie Conservation Area on the 18th of August. So join us then. All of our events and webinars are on our website at deeproots.org/events. And while you're there, if you would consider making a donation, we would be incredibly grateful. And I think we have our winner for the quiz question. Loretta Burns, you have won the note cards. So congratulations, we will get those to you.
And Loretta, if you would send an email to tammy@deeprootskc.org so we know where to send those, that'd be awesome.
Make sure to get your address there. We'll get you those note cards. Congratulations, Loretta Burns. Thank you, everyone else who joined us today for our webinar. You mean so much to us. Your attendance is awesome, and your questions not only help you get the answers that you need, but help us learn more and think about different things for whether it is our webinars or our own gardens and how we go about working with native plants. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.